Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and today's something a bit different. Today I'm going to talk about why I'm selling, and it's something that I didn't expect to happen. A month ago, if you told me this was the case, I would have said, nah, you're wrong. Well, things have changed, and it's time for an update.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. In case you don't know, we run a business that buys more than £100 million worth of property every year for our clients. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. But we also buy for ourselves and occasionally sell for ourselves. And that's what we're talking about today. So stick around to find out what's going on.
So it's time for this week's news story. And it's an interesting one we're bringing you this week. It's a post from the charity Shelter. And I'm going to read you the post. It says, a rent increase is as good as an eviction for many private renters. Yesterday, the Office for National Statistics published data that showed the average private rents are up by 7.5% in England compared to last year. The Renters' Rights Bill must get rents increased under control by limiting in-tenancy rent hikes. And I think all of that is an absolute fair statement. 7.5% is a lot. But what's really interesting is then they go to post what I think is quite a misleading graphic. And they say what cost of items would be if they had gone up with the same as private rent since 1988. It said a chicken would cost £53, 50 litres of petrol would cost £219, 6 bananas would cost £12.96, and 4 pints of milk would cost £12.36. And if you just take it for face value, you get the impression that that's what rents have done since 1988, but it's really misleading because what they have actually done is used 7.5% each year since 1988 and not the actual rate of inflation. Because if they had, there wouldn't be much difference to a normal price of chicken, a normal 50 litres of petrol, normal 4 pints of milk, and so on. It's used selective data for 1 year to make it look very, very damning when it comes to rent hikes. Actually, if you look at the data, for many years since 1988, rents have been less than inflation. So a price of chicken would be cheaper than 1988 if you picked that year. But of course they've not, because that doesn't grab the attention. And this particular post was on LinkedIn. And I found it quite interesting because the people in the comments understandably had missed the context of this and hadn't realised that Shelter had used just 1 year's worth of data to put out this more sensational story. And I think there's a couple of things here. One, you have to be careful of your charity of choice. I see Shelter as more of a political organisation than a charity, and that might be unfair, but there's lots of charities we support that I see do meaningful work and don't really play the politics game. And it's always a bit disappointing for me when I see charities going down this more political route rather than what they probably intended to be at the very beginning. But it's also a lesson in go beyond the headlines, and this is something we do on the news story of the week all the time. Is you see a headline, you go, oof, that's bad, or that's incredible. But actually, you often, with a little bit of digging, realise that the headline is sometimes misleading, or in this case, really misleading. So, interesting data there. And the truth is, if you want to know, well, the price of chicken would be the same as 1988 when accounted for inflation. So would petrol and so would milk, because rents actually match inflation over the long term. Property prices do grow in excess of inflation, according to the data, over the long term, but rents keep up with inflation. And that's why it's an inflation-proof asset. What you have are years where it spikes much higher and falls much lower, but over the long term, it's actually in line with inflation. Of course, that isn't going to get many comments, and it's not that sensational, so that's not what's reported here. So an interesting one. You've got to be careful when you talk about charities, because I'm sure they do some good work there as well. Just I wish they'd stay away from the politics and also be a bit more truthful with what they're putting out there.
It's not often that we base a whole episode about what's going on in our own individual property portfolios. It's something we tend to reference more in passing in the context of talking about all the deals we do at Property Hub Invest or what's happening in the market more generally. But this week we are giving the whole episode over to what we are up to. And the reason for doing that is shock news just in. Rob, you are selling a property. What is going on? Has all the doom and gloom finally got to you? Are you on your way to the exit?
I've cracked, Rob. I've had enough. No, I'm not fed up. I'm actually in a wonderful mood today. It's very sunny outside as we record this. So no, it's not me feeling a bit down on things. It's actually something I've talked about on the podcast before, which is the monopoly strategy. But I felt I really needed to give everyone an update. And I thought it'd be useful, Rob, for you to give an update as well, because we get so many questions about the monopoly strategy. And I think it was only a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, that I said no immediate changes right now because the market's not right. And this is the way the world works. Things change. And I've now decided to sell one of my properties. So I thought it'd be really interesting to explain the rationale behind that and talk about future plans as well. And if we can get your plans for the immediate future and longer term future as well, I thought we did a great episode out of it.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And I feel like as a listener, you owe me an explanation, Rob, because you said that you weren't planning any changes. I don't believe the market's changed much over the last month or two, really. So what's going on?
Well, the property I've selected to sell is in the Northwest. And I've recently commented on the strength of the Northwest market at the moment. Properties are coming on and selling quite quickly. It's really weird. I'm going to dig into it more because I don't understand why the Northwest is outperforming the rest of the market right now, but it is. Because of that, because transactions are healthy, at least in the area I'm selling, and I feel that I'll be able to attract the number I'd want for this property. Nationally, the market is very sluggish at the moment. Not a great environment for selling property, but in this area, it is actually okay. And that is one of the reasons why I've selected this property to sell. I think, Rob, at this point, it's probably useful for us to remind everyone what the monopoly strategy is in case they've missed those previous episodes. Highly recommend you go back, search monopoly strategy and you'll find it. But reminding people what it is and why, to us at least, it's useful.
Yeah, you're the one who coined it, Rob. But as I understand it, the analogy to monopoly is you're taking a number of green houses and replacing it with one red hotel. In other words, you're taking a portfolio. Portfolios are often built up initially with some cheaper, low-value properties, often not the best. They're your starter properties. They're the ones that get you going. They're the best you can do at the time, but they're on the cheaper end. You build up a portfolio of some number of them, and then you consolidate down. So maybe you sell 2 cheaper ones to buy 1 more premium one. So the key thing here is that executing the monopoly strategy is not an exit from property. It isn't reducing your portfolio value. It's just reducing the number of individual units. And doing that when the time is right, and later on we can talk about when the time is right, it has multiple benefits. So obviously, fewer properties are easier to manage than a larger number of properties. It also tends to be the case that more premium properties are better positioned for capital growth. And critically, the more premium properties tend to be less work. You just don't get the hassle that you get at the lower end of the market. So that's my summary. Those are some of the drivers. So I'm curious, Rob, about which of those drivers, or if it's something else, that prompted you to make this particular move.
I think the easiest way to pick a property to sell in a monopoly strategy is what gives you headaches or what's just not worth the hassle. Because when you've got a reasonable sized portfolio, you are going to have some brilliant properties that bring in a great return or great capital growth or sometimes both. And you're like, wow, they're wonderful. Never give me any issues. And then you've got others that seem to give you a load of headaches and not a lot of return financially. And then they're the easy ones to go, well, let's trade. Let's sell that one and put those funds in a pot to go and get a property more like the others that are performing well. Normally a much higher value property. And the sale of this property alone won't give me enough money to go and buy the other type of properties I want. So the monopoly strategy is selling multiple properties to go and buy the bigger property, the red property in monopoly. So that's what I'll have to do, or add some of my own personal funds to it. We don't need to get into all of that now, but I think what is useful is to talk about this property and why. So it is more hassle. I've highlighted that already. To give you an idea, this is one of the properties I've had longest in my portfolio. And because of that, it is also one of the cheapest properties in my portfolio. And Rob, comfortably, by far, the worst performer for capital growth in my portfolio by a long, long way, which I think is a great example of those cheaper properties not delivering on capital growth and more premium type properties that do. It's not been a barnstormer. If this was an advert for property investment and this was the only property you ever owned, you probably wouldn't do another one. That's the beauty of building a portfolio out, by the way, is that you get to see the ups and the downs. I really feel sorry for people who their first property is a stinker. And I kind of feel sorry for people who get a property and the first one is amazing, because both are deluded. Because property isn't amazing and property isn't terrible. It's somewhere in the middle. And when you have a portfolio, you experience all of that. So this one has caused me no end of troubles over the years. We've had police turn up at this property for tenant issues. There's years where I've made absolutely no money because some maintenance has had to be done and the amount I'm making each month is so low that it's wiped out all the profits for that year. And then it becomes an easy one, Rob, when you go, okay, well, this property has delivered very little in capital growth compared to some others in my portfolio. It doesn't make a lot per month in terms of profit. Those profits could be easily wiped out by maintenance issues. And I've had some great tenants in this property, but I've also had some troublesome tenants. And I've had more than enough to make me think, you know what? In the grand scheme of things, this one is worth moving on. Let's take those funds, pop them back in the pot, and let's go hunting for a red property.
I completely see it. That seems to make perfect sense. But for me to make a move of this kind, you normally need to have three factors in place. So you need to have like the strategic desire to do it. Clearly you have that. This property has not performed and it's not going to start performing in terms of what you want. You also need the market to be playing ball. You were saying recently how that wasn't the case. The market wasn't ready. But then you pointed out today that the market in the Northwest actually is working really well for selling into. So that makes sense. But the third thing that you often need, I'm curious about whether that's there now, is some kind of personal property related trigger, whether it's a tenant moving out or a refinance, something that snaps you out of the status quo and makes you make that move. So on this occasion, is there anything like that? Or have you just come to the end of your tether with this?
I think it's a good point, Rob. There was two things. One, the awareness around the market, knowing that things had strengthened. So selling in that area is okay. But second, the property become vacant again. And that's when you tend to reflect, right, on these type of properties. Even if you're just reflecting on your strategy, like, what do I want to do with this property moving forward? Like, what type of mortgage am I going for? It makes you think. And if you'd asked me a month ago, are you selling? The answer still would have been no, but it's just because it became vacant. And in the last 4 to 8 weeks, I've seen the strength of the Northwest. I thought, actually, let's do it. This is part of my bigger plan. The monopoly strategy is something I'm trying to implement slowly. This isn't a panic. And now this is a great opportunity to move forward. So I think you make a really good point, Rob. It's not just some rash decision. We naturally have these pauses, don't we, in our portfolio that make us go, okay, what should I do with this? And sometimes it's as simple as get another tenant. But in this example, there's a bit more.
Yeah. One final thing, just to stress test your decision a little bit. The Northwest, as we know, is the best performing part of the country at the moment by pretty much any measure. You've got this property that hasn't really delivered for you in terms of capital growth. But do you have that niggle that now might be the time that it starts performing? If the Northwest is going to do really well for the next few years, have you just held it through all this pain? Then you're floating it just as it's about to finally come to the point in the cycle where it finally does its job. Not to try and make you second guess yourself or anything, but it just came to mind.
Right, I'm calling the agent. I think it's a great point, and it's absolutely crossed my mind. But this type of property is such low value to begin with that even if it was to go up by 10% in the next 12 months, it wouldn't change my life. And that's a lovely position to be in, and I don't take that lightly. So I'm not trying to be arrogant about the situation, but I'm also realistic that because it is the lowest value property, or at least one of the lowest value properties I've got in my portfolio, the market moving up by a significant amount, 10% say, isn't going to be a game changer. But getting another tenant in, and that tenant possibly not being a great one, would be. So I think at some point you've just got to go with it. And if you ask me today, I do not intend to sell another one this year. But if the market changes and circumstances changes, I'd be open to it. So that's where I'm at with my portfolio. And I think there's loads more we can get into, Rob, but appreciate it's been very me focused on what I'm doing. And people love hearing from you as well. So what are your plans for this year with your portfolio? What do you intend to do?
Yeah, well, if we focus on selling to start with, because that's what you've been mostly talking about, I'm in the same position that you were a month ago. I'm not planning to sell anything this year, but I've got a few on my list. So I did a bit of a portfolio review exercise earlier in this year. Start the new year's often the time when you do that kind of thing. And I've got 3 properties on my list that I would like to get rid of. One, I really would rather not own anymore for many of the reasons that you've got in common with the one that you're selling. And 2, that are fine. They're absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They will do a good job for someone, but they're not doing the job for me anymore. So I've got those on my list to move on at some point. But like I said earlier, you need to typically have those three factors. You need to have the strategic imperative to do it, you need the market to be right, and you need the property situation to be right. In the case of the two of them that are just okay, it's possible that there will be an event that will mean that the time is right. So the mortgages have got quite a way to go, so I don't think it will be the mortgages, but it could be a tenant moving out. That could be the trigger for one of those. So while I'm not anticipating selling anything this year, that wouldn't be the greatest shock in the world. The one that I really would like to sell actually had the property trigger towards the end of last year, had a tenant moving out who'd been a really good tenant. This property has had a lot of not very good tenants, a lot, which is why I want to sell it. But then we finally had a good one, like great, had a really good couple of years. Then when they moved on, it's like, okay, that maybe now is the time to get rid. But the third factor wasn't there. The market wasn't right. This was not in the Northwest, and the market was so slow. It's like, if I list it now, either I'm going to have to take a big hit on the price, or it's just going to sit there. There's going to be cost. There's going to be hassle. The time is not right. So I bit the bullet, spent the money to freshen it up, and got another tenant in there. So far, cross fingers, haven't heard anything, all good. So that's a long and waffly way of saying that while I'm not planning on selling, but I'm also not blindly holding. There are some properties that I know that I definitely want to hold. There's these couple of maybes where I'll be on the lookout. And then there's one where I'm basically looking for any excuse. So I have to see how the market pans out and how just circumstances play out to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me, Rob. And like you said, a month ago, I had no intention either, but the market and a bit of timing moved my decision. So it's quite unique for us to talk about selling a property on the podcast. I think this might be the first time ever we've talked about it after all these years. So it's not something you should ever do lightly. And our main focus is building. We talked in the past about the type of properties that we're in the market for at the moment, the type of properties that we're looking to invest in. But has your thinking changed around that? If your next buy to let, what characteristics must it have for you to go, okay, I'm committing to that one?
So the more time goes on, the more of my time has become absorbed by business and by family, the more I start to optimize for convenience above all else. So in the past, I've done all kinds of things. I've done very cheap properties. I've done the refurb, refinance kind of thing. I've done student lets. I've done mini HMOs. Not doing any of that anymore. From now on, I'm just looking for something that sits there, that goes up in value and brings in money without me hearing about it, which sounds really crude, but it is the truth. So what that boils down to, it's all the same thing. Premium, I think, is the word, which doesn't have to mean the absolute best of the best, but just towards the upper end of the market for whatever it is. It doesn't matter if it's a house or a flat. It just needs to be something that is towards the upper end of the market, because that tends to mean that you have a more stable, shall we say, quality of tenant. It means that if you've got something really nice, you can have your pick of the tenants and get really choosy about who you rent to. And bonus, they tend to go up in value the most as well. So for me, it really is that simple. It's just going for something premium in one of the right parts of the country. And we've talked about this extensively, and the right parts of the country at the moment basically means anywhere that isn't the southeast. You can get more granular than that, but that is it in a nutshell. And I know, Rob, that your thinking is not a million miles away from that. But there's something else that we were talking about recently, which is the actual amount of rental profit that comes in, not the percentage or anything, but the actual amount. And you've got a threshold for that, which I didn't, but I think it's worth talking about because that's not something I really hear being talked about anywhere else.
Yeah, you're right, Rob. We did. It was just a quick side conversation that we had in the week, but it's probably useful to share it. When I look at a property now, it needs to bring in a minimum net income per month to make it worthwhile. Because property does take up some of your time. You can set it up to be hands-off, but it doesn't mean you're fully hands-off. You still have to make decisions. So there's still thinking to be done, even if you outsource the management and you have a great mortgage broker, or you have a PA like Rob to run your portfolio. You still have to do thinking. It still takes a bit of your headspace. So the number I landed on was an absolute minimum of $500 per month profit. That's really, for where I'm at with my portfolio right now, the minimum it needs to clear every month. And that's after all costs, that's after management costs, that's after mortgage costs. That's my net number.
Is that after tax?
Not after tax, no. I didn't take into consideration the tax. But what I would say is that's the minimum. Ideally, I'd like to see it higher than that. But if it's a really strong property, I'd consider it at that level. But that is the absolute bare minimum now I'd want to see. And ideally, a lot more. And actually, Robert, I said to you, ideally double that. That's kind of where I'd love it to be, is that type of level. But I didn't want to be ruling properties out that were absolutely brilliant deals and say they were 600 per month. So the number ideally is higher, but that is the absolute bare minimum now I would need to see for it to make it worthwhile.
And I totally get why that's the case. It makes a lot of sense for the monopoly strategy, because you end up with fewer individual properties, same portfolio value, but fewer properties, each representing a larger chunk of your portfolio and each bringing in a higher amount of rental income. So yeah, I get it. But if you work back from there, you can kind of do the ROI maths in reverse and figure out what kind of purchase price you'd be looking at for something that brings in that amount of net income. And it's quite a bit. It's definitely, for the kind of areas that we talk about outside the southeast, you are looking at some of the more expensive rental type properties out there. There are obviously massive 5-bedroom detached houses, lovely family homes that are worth far more than that, but they're just never going to work as a rental property. So if you restrict it to the universe of things that would actually work as a rental, you're looking at the top end there. And that makes sense given the objective and given where you are. But of course, you've already said this, Rob, but I really want to emphasize it. That doesn't mean that it's the right thing for everyone to be doing, because everyone is at a different stage. And you certainly don't want anyone to think that, oh no, if I'm buying a house for anything less than £500,000, it's just going to be a disaster, it'll be hassle, it's not worth it. That's not the case at all.
Such an important point. Like, please do not think you should copy us. In fact, do not copy us. I think it's useful to share because we are at a stage of our portfolio. But you listening may be ahead of us, or you may be just starting out, and both places are great. Well done to you. The fact that you're on the journey is an amazing thing. And I also want to stress, I have no regrets about buying the property that I purchased. And in fact, if the person who buys this property off me is a buy-to-let investor, then I'd say good luck to you, because it's a good starter property. And no, I'm not selling it via the podcast. It's on an agent. I will never reveal where it is. So this is not the intention. So this is all good, solid, wholesome advice. But if somebody went and got this property, I'd think great, because they're going to learn. They're going to get started. I have had capital growth. And yes, some years the profits have been wiped out. But I've also had years where I've made money. It's just not right for me now. Getting started in property is better than just waiting for 4 years to try and buy the type of property we're talking about. I would much rather people just get going than wait year after year and let the market leave them behind. Build the portfolio if you are starting out. And if you are further on than us, then you should absolutely not even consider a property like this. Like, no way. You should be doing very different things, but different things to our plans for the future as well. That's the wonderful thing about property, is there's no one model fits all. And lots of people say, oh, well, you must do this way. It must be HMOs. It must be buy-to-let. It must be holiday lets. It's rubbish. It must be what's right for you. You've got to understand your goals. Get very, very clear on your goals, your vision, what you're trying to achieve. Then be very honest with yourself about your situation. So obviously financially, but also time, experience. What can you bring to the portfolio? Are you great at fixing things, or are you great with the numbers? Whatever it might be. And then you find a strategy that suits your circumstances, your stage of your strategy. And then you'll find a strategy that suits your finances, your stage of journey, your skill set, and you'll make a better decision. We've got a business called Property Hub Invest, and we frequently say it is not going to be right for most people. And that is the truth, because it's not. Because we have hundreds of thousands of downloads on this podcast every month, and we're very grateful for that. And that means there's a lot of people listening. And there's absolutely no one strategy that would be right for even the majority of you. So this is one way. You can learn from our way, take the lessons from what we do to your own strategy. But be wary of the guru who says, it's this way. This is the way to make money in property. There's loads of ways, and the best way is the one that's right for you.
Okay, let's move on to Hub Extra, and nothing to buy or sell when it comes to Hub Extra. This is a free resource that I've come across, and it's called radio.garden. And this for me is what the internet is all about. It's just brilliantly random. Basically, when you go onto it, it looks like Google Earth. It's a satellite map of the world. The difference is there's loads and loads of little dots, and every dot is a radio station. And as you drag around on the globe, it connects you to a different radio station. So you can literally spin the globe around, and suddenly you're listening to a radio station in Chad, and then one in Nicaragua, and hearing whatever they're playing at that moment. So it's super random, but this is something that I've been using a lot over the last couple of weeks, just when I want to have background music on. Because even with something like Spotify, it just feeds you stuff more like what you've already played. So to find something truly random and to hear different languages and whatever chat they've got going on between songs and stuff, I've been having a lot of fun with this. So that's radio.garden.
I love it, Rob. It's such a cool resource. It's something that I've never seen before. And that's why I love this show, because we both bring things that are new to us, and that means everyone who listens gets to win at this point of the show, but also each other, because we are sharing what we're seeing and interested in each week, but just sharing it publicly. So I love this segment of the show, and I'd love you to join us next week for the Property Podcast and pick up the Sunday Times, and you'll see our smiling faces answering your questions there. But if you want an audio version of that, you've got Ask Rob and Rob as well. What a wonderful world we live in. Well, until those wonderful events take place, take care, have fun, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.